Of course, not all the ways that humans affect landscapes leads to degradation. Other parts lead to conversion to some other productive form for the land. But it's not just agriculture, it's also whatever we do to change a natural habitat into something that's important for human ends. I grew up on the island of Manhattan. I really enjoyed growing up in Manhattan, but I really also loved, being out in nature. And I remember driving back into the city once and suddenly trying to imagine what Manhattan Island looked like before there was a city there. With forests and streams and all kinds of biodiversity and wetlands. So urban areas, suburban areas, all have to be in that same category of conversion. So obviously, once we invented agriculture, that became a major way in which we converted natural ecosystems to ones that are productive and immediately useful to people. But it's not just somebody's garden. It's not somebody's tomato field in New Jersey. It's also things like sugarcane fields in Brazil, coffee plantations in Brazil, and even things like plantations of fast-growing gum trees from Australia, which are used, for producing paper pulp. The big challenge is one, sort of devising ways to do that conversion to whatever form of productivity that seems important and useful, but how to do it in a way that it actually sustains itself over time. And I would have to say that by and large, humans haven't been very good at that. We tend not to take care of the soil in these places. We tend to think of soil actually as dirt, when in fact is a living system. And its ability actually to support the productivity in these converted areas actually directly depends on the health of the soil. There are a lot of big issues tied up in this. And one really big one is, do we really need to convert any more land to support the current population and the couple billion more people that we can expect to arrive? These have been very dramatic times in terms of population growth. So the world population today is 3 times what it was when I was born. It was 2.7 billion when I was born, and now it's easily in excess of 7 billion and headed for at least 9 billion. The really interesting thing is if we really pursue this in a thoughtful, organized way, it's completely possible to feed a population of 9 billion people a reasonable and healthy diet without destroying another square meter of nature. That may seem sort of a really wild statement, but in fact, if you break it down into its pieces, we can avoid having to convert any more natural ecosystems into ones being managed for our most immediate needs. One gets there, one, by improving productivity of agriculture in places where it's poor, but being careful to do that in ways that don't have a lot of downsides in terms of agricultural pollution from fertilizers in the water systems. It's also important to tackle food waste, because 30% of all food in the world is wasted. Here in the United States, our major form of food waste is having bought too much and stuffed it in our refrigerators until it spoils before we actually get to use it. In a place like Africa, the food waste is about the productivity of individual farmers, which doesn't actually ever get to market. Just remember that 30% of all food is wasted, and nobody in their right mind is in favor of food waste. So that's the second way in which we can approach a goal of not converting any more natural ecosystems into agricultural productivity. And the third way actually is modifying our diet. It's not saying that everybody has to go vegetarian, although anybody who's been to India will attest that vegetarian food can be absolutely delicious. It's dialing back on what we eat in terms of animal products, and particularly in terms of red meat. That's what our doctors have been telling us anyway. Eat more fish and chicken, less beef. And the fascinating thing is, at the end of World War II, in North America and in Europe, the amount of beef that actually was eaten was not a large amount. I mean, the big deal was to get a piece of beef at the Sunday dinner. People did not expect to have it on demand 7 days a week. One of the keys here to avoiding further conversion is actually thinking more modestly about how we actually consume the products of converted ecosystems. As we think about this in the larger scale, we also need to do it in a way that the conversions of these lands will not affect freshwater ecosystems, not allow conversion of the land right up to the edge of water bodies and water courses, leave the natural vegetation in place, protects soil erosion, improves water quality, improves everything that we actually care about in terms of coastal waters where all the mess actually ends up. So all around the world, these converted areas have been overly fertilized, with the consequence that the nitrogen in particular goes down the river systems, ends up in the estuaries, and creates dead zones, like in the Gulf of Mexico, but in many estuaries around the world. And the number of dead zones in the world have been doubling every decade for 4 decades. It's not just a matter of no further conversion, it's also being gentler in the way we use the converted lands that we already have available to us. And if we can do that, that in the end will provide us a much more sustainable basis for the future of humanity.